Welcome to this podcast about scuba diving for those with Down syndrome. We will cover the essential information for teaching individuals with Down syndrome how to scuba dive safely, acknowledging their learning impairments and potential physical anomalies. We will also cover the potential health complications, diving risks, and adaptive teaching methods. So let's get started.
All right, so get this. Someone sent us a medical guide about scuba diving with Down syndrome.
Really?
Yeah, pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, that's not something you see every day.
It's not.
An everyday pairing.
Yeah, so it's by Dr. Mark Downs.
Okay.
And basically we're going to try to, pull out some of the key insights from this guide just for you.
Sounds good.
So I guess our mission today is to really try to understand, the challenges and the possibilities when it comes to scuba diving for folks with Down syndrome.
Right.
And we should say right up front, we're not doctors. We're not trying to make any medical judgments or anything. We're just trying to get a better understanding of what this is all about.
I like to think of it as giving people a backstage pass to a world that they might not know that much about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, come along with us and let's explore this together.
Yeah.
So before we really dive in, I guess we should do a super quick overview.
Sure.
Down syndrome is a genetic condition where someone is born with an extra chromosome.
Right.
And this can lead to some, physical and intellectual differences. And that's really where this guide gets interesting.
Yeah, and this guide really zeroes in on how those differences relate specifically to scuba diving.
Okay.
It's not trying to be a broad overview of Down syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
It's really just focused on those things that matter when you're underwater.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that Dr. Downs points out that could make diving tricky for someone with Down syndrome?
Well, two areas really stand out, and those are the heart and the neck.
Okay.
So, picture your heart, but there's a little hole between the chambers. This is a common issue with Down syndrome, and even if it gets surgically repaired, it can still increase the risk of problems while diving.
Oh, wow.
Things like decompression sickness.
I see.
Where bubbles form in your blood.
Yeah, that sounds pretty serious.
It is.
What about the neck? What's going on there?
So the bones in the neck can be a little bit unstable in people with Down syndrome. Think of it like the top two vertebrae right at the base of your skull.
Yeah.
They don't fit together quite as snugly as they should.
Okay.
And so any kind of jerky movements underwater can be risky.
Yeah, that does sound pretty scary.
It is.
But I guess knowing about it in advance is really important, right?
Absolutely.
If instructors are aware of this, then they can, adjust how they teach and keep everyone safe.
Right. And it's not just about the physical structure of the neck. There's also the potential for, visual and hearing impairments.
Right.
So imagine trying to communicate underwater where you're reliant on hand signals and visual cues.
Yeah, it's already hard enough sometimes, even with perfect hearing. You know what I mean? Some people are like, wait, what are you trying to tell me?
Right. So instructors really need to be prepared to adapt their teaching methods.
Okay.
It's about meeting each student where they are, understanding their specific challenges and finding ways to work around them.
Yeah, this is reminding me of how, for anyone who learns differently, whether it's Down syndrome or something else, you really need teaching that's tailored to how they learn.
That's a great point. Yeah.
It's not one size fits all.
Definitely not.
Okay, so we've got, some potential physical challenges.
Right.
And then Dr. Downs also talks about, intellectual disabilities and how that affects diving.
He does.
So what's he say about that?
Well, it might take someone with Down syndrome a little bit longer to pick up new skills.
Okay.
And imagine learning something as complex as diving.
Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming for anyone.
Right.
But even more so for someone with an intellectual disability.
So I'm guessing things like smaller classes, more visual learning, like we talked about before, are key.
Exactly. Think less lecture, more hands-on experience.
Yeah.
Dr. Downs really emphasizes breaking skills down into smaller steps.
Okay.
And using lots of visual aids and repetition.
This is making me realize, how much responsibility really falls on the dive instructor.
Oh, it is a big responsibility.
Yeah.
And Dr. Downs doesn't shy away from that.
Okay.
He actually talks about this thing called the RSTC medical statement.
Okay.
Which acts as kind of a gatekeeper for diving safety.
Okay. What's that all about?
So it's basically a medical screening to make sure that anyone who wants to dive is fit to do so.
Okay.
And for people with Down syndrome, Dr. Downs stresses finding a doctor who understands both Down syndrome and diving medicine.
Okay.
They're the ones who can really make the call.
Makes sense. You want someone who can connect the dots between those two worlds.
Right.
And the doctor gives a thumbs up, and then you're good to go.
Well, not quite.
What do you mean, what else does the instructor have to do? So the doctor says, yeah, you're good to go, but the instructor still has like a big role to play.
Right. It's not just a one and done kind of thing.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
Well, it's all about being really aware of the student's abilities, like throughout the training.
Yeah.
They need to be constantly assessing, noticing any signs that maybe things aren't quite right.
So it's like more than just teaching them the diving skills.
Yeah.
It's also about like this constant kind of monitoring and adapting.
Exactly. And that actually brings up a really interesting point.
What's that?
Dr. Downs actually suggests that instructors learn some additional skills.
Okay.
Things that you wouldn't normally associate with diving instruction.
Like, what are we talking about turning dive instructors into doctors now?
Not quite, but it's about having that heightened sense of awareness.
Okay.
So he recommends things like learning how to take blood pressure,
Okay.
how to check temperature, even use a peak flow meter.
A peak flow meter?
Yeah, like, if you have asthma.
Oh, yeah.
The one you blow into.
I've used one of those before.
Right.
So it's like equipping these instructors with even more tools to like really understand their students' well-being.
Exactly.
Like beyond just the typical diving stuff.
Right. And it just shows the level of care that's really involved in adaptive diving.
This is all feeling kind of heavy, Like, do we have any examples of this actually working?
We do.
Okay.
Like people with Down syndrome who are out there diving and loving it. Yeah, Dr. Downs shares a really inspiring story about a young man named Harvey.
Okay, tell me everything.
All right, so when Harvey was diagnosed with Down syndrome, his parents were understandably scared.
Yeah.
They worried about all the things that he might miss out on in life.
Right.
And then Harvey's older brother got into scuba diving.
Okay.
And the family just thought, like, oh, there's no way Harvey could ever do that.
Yeah, it's easy to just immediately jump to the limitations when you hear a diagnosis like Down syndrome.
But they were wrong.
Okay, good.
They found this organization called Diveability.
Okay.
Which specializes in adaptive scuba diving.
I see.
And from Harvey's first time in the water, it was clear that he was hooked.
So, like, he really defied everyone's expectations, even his parents?
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, his mom even says that getting Harvey ready for a dive was one of the few times that he didn't need, like, constant reminders and encouragement. He was just so eager to get in the water.
That's so cool.
It's like diving just unlocked this whole new part of him.
Yeah.
This world where his Down syndrome wasn't holding him back.
Yeah, and that's what's so powerful about this whole idea of adaptive diving.
Right.
It's not focusing on what people can't do. It's about finding ways to make things possible.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
What are like the big takeaways you think are important for our listener to really understand?
I think the most important thing is to realize that diving with Down syndrome is not a simple issue.
Yeah.
There are definitely risks and challenges to be aware of.
Yeah, it's not something to just like jump into without a lot of thought and preparation.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's also important to recognize that with the right knowledge, the right precautions and support, it can be an amazing experience.
It really can.
So it's like awareness of the risks, but also a commitment to like making awesome things happen.
Absolutely. And Dr. Downs provides a ton of resources in his guide to help with that. There's links to online quizzes, support groups for families and individuals with Down syndrome who are interested in diving.
Cool.
Even more stories like Harvey's.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there's a whole network of people out there who are dedicated to making this happen.
There is.
That's really encouraging.
It is.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with something to think about.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So we've talked a lot about, the physical and the intellectual side of Down syndrome,
right,
and how it relates to diving.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the emotional and the psychological impact?
Yeah.
How might diving benefit someone with Down syndrome on like a deeper level?
That's a great question. It really gets to the heart of why adaptive diving is so important.
Right.
It's not just about the physical act of diving.
Yeah.
It's about the feeling of accomplishment, the joy of discovery, the sense of belonging that it can bring.
Exactly. And on that note, let's take a quick pause and come back to wrap things up and give our listeners some next steps.
All right, we're back. And yeah, I'm still kind of thinking about that question,
Yeah.
the emotional side of this.
Right.
For someone with Down syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, think about that feeling of weightlessness underwater,
Mm-hmm.
that sense of freedom and exploration.
Yeah.
For someone who faces, physical and intellectual challenges on land.
Right.
That can be so empowering.
It's like the water makes everyone equal in a way.
Exactly.
Mm.
And, the underwater world is just full of wonder and beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine seeing a coral reef for the first time.
Right.
Or swimming alongside a sea turtle.
Yeah.
These experiences can spark joy and curiosity in anyone. But for someone with Down syndrome, they can be even more profound.
Yeah, I bet. And the sense of accomplishment, too.
Absolutely.
Like, learning to dive is hard for anyone.
Right.
But for someone with Down syndrome who maybe has been told their whole life what they can't do.
To actually master these skills, it's got to be a huge confidence boost.
It really is. It's a testament to their resilience and determination.
For sure. And let's not forget, like, the social side of this, too.
Oh, yeah.
Diving is, it's usually a group activity.
It is.
And that sense of community can be so important.
Absolutely. Especially for someone with Down syndrome who, might face social isolation or stigma.
Right.
Being part of a dive team, can foster that sense of belonging and acceptance.
So it sounds like this is about way more than just like ticking a box or proving something to the world.
Yeah.
It's about personal growth.
Yeah.
Joy, connection.
Yeah.
Really embracing life.
Beautifully said. And that brings us back to Dr. Downs' guide.
Yeah.
It's not just a dry medical manual.
Right.
It's really a celebration of the human spirit.
Yeah.
And the power of adaptive diving to transform lives.
Speaking of the guide, I know he included a bunch of resources for people who want to learn more.
He did.
Or get involved. What were some of the highlights?
Well, there are links to some really cool online quizzes.
Okay.
To test your knowledge, support groups for families and individuals with Down syndrome who are interested in diving.
Right.
And even more inspiring stories like Harvey's.
Awesome. So it sounds like a great place to start if you want to dive deeper into this world.
Definitely.
Pun intended.
Intended.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've explored, the challenges, the possibilities, the medical considerations, the emotional impact of diving with Down syndrome.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah. And I think our listener is walking away with a much deeper understanding.
I hope so.
Of this really complex and fascinating topic.
Me too.
A huge thank you to Dr. Downs for his work in this field.
Absolutely.
His guide is a must-read for anyone who wants to learn more about adaptive diving.
It really is.
And, of course, a big thank you to you, our amazing listener, for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We're always so impressed by your curiosity and your willingness to explore these kind of unexpected topics.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives. But until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper into the world around you.
Happy diving, everyone.
We hope that you have learned a lot about how those with Down syndrome can safely participate in recreational scuba diving. Our next podcast will be a detailed look at the Handicapped Scuba Association, the HSA. We hope that you will join us exploring this amazing organization. Until next time, safe diving.